Ned was constantly, I think, crying for the world. And he had so much hope. He wanted to make a difference so much. And he knew that he could only do it little bit by little bit by little bit. And he was constantly saying, you can only change where you are, the place we're at. You can't change the world. But he desperately wanted to change the whole world.
Welcome to Social Developers Network podcast. Today is the second in the series about NED Foundation and Ned Iceton, its founder, who nearly 50 years ago started bringing people together. Each in their own way were making a difference in the world through community development. And so today we have the honour of speaking with Mary Porter, a true trailblazer in community service, politics and restorative practice. Mary began her career as a registered nurse and midwife in Wollongong, New South Wales, and spent 12 years working with Indigenous communities. In 1977, she moved to the ACT and co-founded the Tuggeranong Community Service and the ACT Volunteering Association, now Volunteering ACT. As CEO, she established the ACT Volunteers in Policing program and helped found Volunteering Australia. Mary's dedication earned her numerous accolades, including being named a member of the Order of Australia in 2003. She was also an honorary ambassador for the ACT and a key figure in introducing restorative practice within the ACT justice system and schools. Elected to the ACT Legislative Assembly in 2004, Mary served until 2016, holding various influential roles and successfully introducing legislation on retirement villages, sport, domestic animal welfare and end-of-life issues. After retiring, she continued her community work in Murray's Beach and helped establish the Hunter Restorative Community. Today, Mary serves as the chairperson on the NED Foundation board, where she continues her legacy of leadership and community service. In this episode, we'll delve into her recollections of Ned Iceton and explore the profound impact he had on her and her work. So join me now and let's meet Mary Porter.
My name is Mary Porter. I was working as a community worker in Canberra, where my then husband and I had moved to from the Northern Territory, where I've been nursing in remote communities. And we've been there quite a while, but still very new to living in that kind of way, rather than living in a remote community. I was very much involved in community work. Community work was the way that I got to learn about my community in Canberra and get involved. And I saw a flyer advertising a public meeting where they were going to talk about this thing called the Social Development Network. And I thought, I like networks, I like knowing about people. So that sounds interesting to me, I think I'll go along. And I met David Purnell and a few other people that were involved in the network at that time. And there was a workshop coming up in Jindabyne, and I thought, right, I'm in for that. And David said, well, we can take you down in our car. And we went down there, and Ned and his wife Joan, who'd predeceased him, they were there, but they'd been to India and they were sick. So they were downstairs in a flat. So unfortunately we didn't get to see them towards the end. But that's when I met Ned, and that's when I found out about the network and the workshops.
What year would that have been?
Around about 1985, but I'm not entirely sure. My memory's a bit vague around about that time, around what time it was. Certainly the records will show when that workshop was held in Jindabyne, and I think the subsequent one, the next year, was held in Jindabyne as well, if I'm not wrong.
That was sort of a public meeting.
The public meeting that I went to, there was a little group of people involved in the network in Canberra. So I guess they organised that public meeting. I went along, found out about SDN and signed up to go to the workshop.
So when you first met Ned then, he wasn't in his best form.
No,
He travelled overseas and
yeah, he wasn't.
when did you start to, get his measure?
Well, I think probably the next workshop. Yeah.
How did he strike you?
At first I was a little bit afraid of him, nervous, because he's a tall man, quite distinguished in many ways. And he spoke, he used a lot of big words, shall I say. He impressed me with his knowledge. So I got a little bit, I lowered my expectation of myself, I think, in that regard. And I became like the little Mary that was at school and this big, important person who was Ned Iceton. But I soon realised that that wasn't the real Ned at all. And he was a warm, engaging person who really cared deeply about the world and really cared deeply about every person he came in contact with. And I could see why the SDN was really important to him, that opportunity for people to come together and network and share. And I just thoroughly enjoyed the whole experience of being at a workshop.
Do you recall those first interactions with him?
Well, yes, because they were all tied up in being in an SDN workshop. It's very difficult to separate those different impressions that I got, because it was the impressions of him in a workshop, which may probably be different if you meet him in different environments. Often we seem to, and I wasn't alone in this, seem to view him as the father sitting there and Joan as the mother in some ways. And he did view us, he told us later he viewed us all as his children, because he didn't have any children of his, they didn't have children of their own.
Ned and Joan had a particular dynamic between them. Tell me about that.
They were just a lovely couple. And I understood that Ned had been previously single for a long time and this was a new relationship. And sadly, Joan got breast cancer and didn't survive. And I think that's just so sad.
Did you then attend the SDNs regularly?
I tried to attend them as much as I could. And I then became part of that SDN network in Canberra. So the ongoing experience was there, and attending the workshops and also attending the group in Canberra helped me enormously in my settling down into Canberra, my community work, etc., because it was a safe place where I could talk about anything. And also I was challenged by my experience with other people at the workshops, and I got instantly these friendships. So that was all really lovely. But it was an experience I'd never come across before, and I couldn't describe to anybody. So I just say, well, you go along and you sit around and you make up your mind what you're going to talk about when you get there, and you share meals, etc., etc. So in describing it, you really are describing the experience, but it's very hard to describe it otherwise.
I know that a lot of people talk about it feeling like home.
It is a feeling, but I wouldn't have said it for me. It was like coming home. That wasn't my feeling. It was just a welcoming space where you were appreciated as you without having to have any labels or hats on. And what you brought was honoured by the people there, and you in turn honoured the gift of other people sharing, whether you found the subject matter difficult or not. But there was always a tension, in the beginning there was always a tension in the room between the macro and the micro. So if someone started talking about micro issues, which could be around their personal relationships with somebody, Ned got a little bit agitated. So he was saying we should be looking at the micro and the macro, but when we started to talk about those things, he would get a little bit uneasy.
Because of the micro or because of the talking about relationships?
I'm not entirely sure, but I know that when Joan came, Joan was constant at a lot of the workshops that I was at. And when Joan started to talk about sexuality, that was definitely uncomfortable subject matter.
So you kept attending then. You'd found a place that had met, you know, some things that you were looking for. Did you notice changes over the period of time that you attended?
Never knew who was going to turn up, except when you got there. But I would go with other people, so I'd know beforehand there was going to be some people that I know. So I wouldn't be so frightened as I was the first time, because the first time I was really nervous and wanted to turn around and go back. As a matter of fact, unfortunately, I was being taken there by somebody, so I could hardly turn around and go back. So, yeah, it was different every single time.
What was it that helped you push through that first resistance?
Self-talk, you know. I don't, being silly, it'll be all right. Just trying to get to know people, and break down that nervousness in myself.
So that's a sort of a displacement behaviour in a new situation. So time moved on. What's the sort of next event or situation?
Well, two things I think were significant. One time when I was staying in the Ned house for some reason, and I have no idea why I was there. But anyway, whenever the Tiananmen Square thing happened, for some reason I was staying at the Ned house. And I remember sitting in the lounge room watching that play out on the television with Ned. And that was a very significant evening, I thought. The other thing that happened, as I became more and more involved in community work in Canberra, my time got taken up a lot, and I found myself less able to go to the SDN workshops.
Meanwhile, for you, you're getting sort of more and more involved, or maybe not, but there was a time where you became more involved. Tell us about that.
Well, when the organisation was formed, and that happened at that rainforest meeting, the embryo, the idea came from that meeting at that time in the rainforest. And when Ned said, I want all these things to happen after I die, and Ian, as a matter of fact, said, why are you waiting till you die? And so then that started the movement towards forming the organisation. And Ned, in his usual fashion, who's taught us all as his children, he decided he could tell us what we were going to do. And he just eyeballed each of us and said, you'll be this and you'll be that. And he said, and you'll be vice president. I'm obviously going to be president, says Ned, obviously, and you will be vice president, which I don't think he thought there was any role in that necessarily, but it was just a name, a title. So, and then they started to have the board meetings regularly in our house. And stay down the motel down the road. And Ian, again, did the cooking, and other people brought meals. David Purnell would bring something, and we'd share the meals together. Ian would make sure it all went smoothly, would buy morning and afternoon teas, and really would be like a host for those meetings. So he gradually became more and more involved in that way as well. But then when I became a member of Parliament, it became really difficult to go to the January annual workshops, very difficult. Because often, even though that's your break, and you're supposed to have from sometime in December to sometime the end of January off, ostensibly, there was always something happening. And so there's always, you've got to come in and we've got to look at this or do that. So I couldn't necessarily go to a place where there was no easy way of being contacted. And so I couldn't go to Guthaga, for instance, because it would have been impossible for them to necessarily get hold of me quickly and for me to be there. So I just stopped going if it was a place where I couldn't be reached.
During that time, Joan passed away.
Yeah.
It must have been a difficult time for Ned, certainly, but for others as well.
I only recollect being really sad that she was so ill, and sad for Ned. I don't recall anything about a memorial service or a funeral or anything like that that I was involved in. I've got no memory of that. I just know that she was very important to Ned and shared a lot of his interests and his passions, and so it was a really lovely relationship. And I was just so sad for Ned.
If you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing. We've got more to come. And now, back to Mary's story. Can you remember any particular events that happened that sort of really for you portray Ned's character?
Oh, definitely the clown workshop that would happen to we used to meet in the residential facility of the university. There was room, you know, the different units or whatever they were, so we could, during the holidays when those were empty, that's where we held the SDN. And it was one of those SDNs that we had a clown workshop. A woman called, I think she's still around, and still in contact, and her name, Jane, I think her name. Anyway, she said she'd like to do that for her session, and she brought a pile of clothes and put them in the room. First of all, she got us to learn how to walk like a clown, and I thought this is what we were going to be doing. We were going to be like clowning, but that wasn't the agenda at all. The agenda was to actually role play a life of a person from being born to growing up, to falling in love, and to dying, right? And so this pile of clothes in the middle of the room, we were told to pick something out that we'd like to wear. And then after we put the clothes on, she asked us if we could start to live those different parts of our lives. And Ned took out a long chenille dressing gown and a cloth hat, and he stood there in those clothes, and he became a different person. I was a fairy floss fairy. I was born in a fairy floss machine at a fair, and I had some coloured socks, but they didn't match. And John, at one stage, John Russell, wanted my socks because he decided that he wanted to be in a relationship with me. His person wanted to be in a relationship with the fairy floss fairy, and part of that, I had to part with my socks. And I actually hit him on the back very vigorously and hurt him. And he tells me that story still of how much I hurt him because I didn't want him to pinch my socks. But Ned stood there in the middle of the room and cried. Not violent sobbing, but just tears running down his face. And we asked him why he was crying, and he said he was crying for the world. And that was Ned. Ned was constantly, I think, crying for the world. And he had so much hope. He wanted to make a difference so much. And he knew that he could only do it little bit by little bit by little bit. And he was constantly saying, you can only change where you are, the place we're at. You can't change the world. But he desperately wanted to change the whole world. And then he saw things happening in the world, and he desperately wanted us all to make sure we knew that these bad things were happening. And I don't know how we would have coped right now with this climate change catastrophe that we're going through, because I think he would. I know it started while he was still alive, but I don't think it had the momentum that it's got now. And I don't know how Ned would have been. Because I think we're all crying for the world now. Well, most of us are, but those of us that really understand climate change. I think he wanted to tell people that this is happening. Wake up to the fact that this is happening. And he wanted us all to be part of that, wherever we were in our community, to make sure that we would make a difference, because maybe if we made a difference in our small way, we could stop some of this stuff happening. But you know, when it came to that mythology around when the clock turned over to 2000, that something terrible would happen. I don't know what was supposed to happen, but Ned believed strongly that something terrible was going to happen. And he stocked up a lot of water in the house, and he did all sorts of extraordinary things, because he thought when the clock turned over, the water supply would stop, this would stop, that would stop, because of the computers. He was dead set certain. And so he was desperate that we all knew that things were going to be very, very difficult till they reset all the computers. And that how long was this going to last, he didn't know. But that was, you know, he became very passionate about it. It was one of the things he became passionate about. But there was always many things in the world that were happening which were disturbing, which he was grieving about.
Someone even suggested that he may have been, he seemed even slightly disappointed when went by unnoticed. Such was his passion.
Could have been, but I didn't notice that. He just kept on going. I think, well, he probably just went, oh, okay, I was wrong.
So
Well, I think we probably teased him a bit, you know, too.
the organisation had been set up as a legacy, so there was awareness that he's not immortal, and eventually the time came. Can you take us through that period?
Well, I think the thing is, I didn't think he was going to die that quickly. I thought he would live for a good long time after that, because you see, he was a very healthy man in many ways. He hardly drank, he exercised, he meditated every day. He was very conscious of his health and looking after himself, his diet, etc. So I thought Ned would live 80s, 90s, maybe, you know, have even 100. I never thought he would die. And when he got sick, I didn't even believe then he was dying. I thought, oh, well, whatever it is, they'll find out what's wrong with him, and then they'll fix him. You know, he'll be, whatever it is, if he needs some kind of treatment, he'll get the treatment and he'll be fine. I really didn't think he was dying. And I got the greatest shock of my life when they said he was dead, or, you know, seriously, critically ill. Because I didn't think he was going to be. So I wasn't thinking, you know, Ned's getting old and, you know, the organisation has been set up because he's getting old and we need to worry about him dying. I know that was his premonition, maybe, when he said it back in that workshop, when I die. I don't know, but I thought we'd have many, many years of Ned sitting around the board table with us, getting slightly irritated when there was some discussion about spending some money on something he didn't agree with, like a treasurer holding onto the purse strings, and the money was his. The money was definitely his. So he would say, well, I don't know, I don't feel very, mutter. And there would be sometimes, you know, toing and froing, particularly around Beth. Beth was always challenging him around those things, Beth Basnett, who's also deceased now. But finally she did resign from the board because she felt that she was pushing against Ned too much. So, and she didn't like some of the criteria around the grants and all those kinds of things. So, yeah, but I thought he'd be around the board table for yonks. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be.
So was there a transition period then for the board to sort of continue the business after?
I think we just found very, very lucky or fortunate that we had started the organisation, that we had put all these things in place, that we had got the beginnings of policies and procedures and systems recording things, and Michael doing the role of what we call CEO. I don't know what we called it, but it's now business manager, having the person doing the investments, all that sort of stuff. I don't know when Damien came on board, but we felt very fortunate. We had all this stuff in place so that we could continue on, but it felt really strange not to have Ned there, and even more strange for me because I suddenly found myself the president, and I kept saying to people every year, well, who else wants to do this job? But the other thing I found very comforting about that is that the organisation isn't a hierarchical organisation. So even though when Ned was there, of course, I believe everyone deferred to him, but still argued with him, right? But in the end, you defer to Ned. But there was always consensus. There was always a consensus. So, and there continues to be always a consensus. And that's because we're a flat organisation, and there's not a hierarchy in the board. I mean, the act of chairing meetings is a transactional thing. So that kind of activity, chairing a meeting, is a transactional thing, but it's a relational thing. To have the board is a relational board, and it's a flat structure. So that's comforting because the role president just means, well, I chair meetings and I'm more involved with supporting Michael in his work and being there for him as a sounding board, and for him and I to discuss things and to play a key role in that regard, and also with the executive. And I feel very privileged to have that role.
So what was your reluctance, if that's the right word?
Beg your pardon?
What was your reluctance, I say, if that was the right word, about...
Well, because I didn't think that I was anything special, and I was willing to take it on, obviously, because that sort of flowed vice president to president. But I also know that there's many other capable people in the room. But then I realised that this role was really no more important than anybody else's anyway. He was always a bit protective of me in some ways. He cared a lot about me, I think. I'm sure he felt the same way about everybody. That's not just exclusively me. But I always found he was like somehow a father figure, protecting me and wanting me, challenging me to look at myself all the way along the way. So it wasn't like he was saying, oh, a permissive kind of parent, but more a guiding kind of person who was really interested in me as a person.
What was the transitional period like, or was there one?
It's very gradual, and I think it's still happening, because we're now, but we constantly remind ourselves, what would Ned say? If Ned was in the room, what would Ned say? So he's still there, but on the other hand, there are a lot of things happening now in our world that are different to when Ned was here. So we are evolving. And as you have observed, and many people will observe, the organisation is growing in the amount of people that are now working with the organisation, into the organisation, to the organisation. So it's a growing organisation, but the concern I have, and I think many people do have, is that we must keep it relational and we must keep it a flat structure, because we don't want to have some kind of hierarchy that you see in other types of organisations.
So if they're the things that stay the same in terms of the protocol and relationships and so on, are there things that are different now than earlier?
Everything goes slowly as far as I'm concerned, and I'm the one that keeps on saying, let's go slowly. And people say, but Mary says, let's go slowly. And I'm also the person that keeps on saying, and like Ned used to say constantly, it's both and. And so when we say, oh yes, but, and I say, where's the and? Because I believe there's an and, not a but. And if you need to be able to have a good foundation for anything you do. And whilst you think, okay, we've got this good foundation, now we can go off and do this and do that. But every time you go off to do this or that, you need the foundation for that. Because if you built this house over here, that doesn't mean to say you can build that house over there without doing exactly what you did to start to prepare for building this one. Every time you do something, you have to start again from the ground up. And it's really important that everything is from the ground up and not top down.
So what has it been for you? You know, you're sort of, we've had a very quick look from the beginning to the present day. What has been the most rewarding part of your association with Ned the man and Ned the organisation?
Well, I guess it gives me the opportunity to do what I always wanted to do, which is continue to be in the world making a positive contribution. So I'm very fortunate. It's the only organisation that I know of that I've ever felt that there's a place where you can be, where you are not, I don't know how to explain it, but it is a place where you can feel safe. And that's not to say there aren't challenges and there aren't sometimes rubbing up against one another, because that does happen. However, now I think we're starting to employ the restorative culture to make sure that we can deal with those sorts of things in a more restorative way. So that's great. And I really thank Ned a million times over for introducing me to restorative practice, because that has been a really, really important part of my life and my relationships with Ian. And I just feel so fortunate in that, and it's given me many opportunities to travel, initiated by myself on many occasions or by Ian, but we have gone to places that we have shared the restorative journey with other people. And that is only because Ned took that immediate interest in it. So that is the thing that I really value very much, and I now see it as an important part of my life.
How would you describe Ned and his legacy?
I think he was a great leader of people, because he led in a way that we all felt empowered. Well, that was my experience. I felt empowered. I should only talk about myself. Empowered and challenged. He was a great leader of people. I'm so grateful that I knew him. I'm so grateful that I've been allowed to be part of this organisation. And I believe that his legacy will live on for a long, long time, because this organisation never forgets where we've come from. We never forget that.
I asked Mary about John Russell, one of the initiators of the Social Development Network from its inception. John was unable to attend the meeting where I recorded these interviews due to failing health, but his story is crucial, as his hand was continually on the rudder over the decades.
John's contribution goes right back to the beginning. So he's one, apart from Ned, he would be the elder of the organisation. And it is really sad to see him getting old and frail and not able to contribute the way he used to contribute. And he's always been someone who'll speak up and challenge. And also he's a person with great sense of fun, and it's always been fun when John's been around as well. But now there's also his tinge with sadness, because we see him, or I see him failing in his health.
It's been great talking with you.
Thank you very much, David.
It's been a privilege. So that's the episode for today. If you know anyone who might be interested in this podcast, please take a moment and share the link on with them. It really is these small actions that add up and become significant over time. And remember to hit the subscribe button below. So till next time, all the best.